Okay, so welcome back to Hebrews Story Hour. Today we're doing Genesis 34, and it is kind of a side story. I'm looking forward to our discussion. This story ends in a question, which just had a conversation about the Rebecca-Jacob story when Jacob steals the blessing from Isaac, and sort of the complexities of that. And so many of these stories we're reading have a lot of human complexity, and you wonder, well, what's the point? So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and begin Genesis 34. So starting here in verse 1. Vatetse Dinah bat Leah asher yalada leYaakov lir ot vivnot haaretz vayar ota Shechem ben Hamor hachivi nesi haaretz vayikach ota vayishkav ota Vaye'anecha. Verse 3. Vatidbak nafsho Badina bat Yaakov Vaye'ahav et hana'ara Vayedaber alev hana'ara. Verse 4. Vayomer Shechem el Hamor Aviv le'mor kach li et hayalada hazot leisha. Okay, translating now, verse 1. Dinah went out, the daughter of Leah, who was born to Jacob, or it's Leah who bore her to Jacob. She went out to see the daughters of the land. And Shechem saw her, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land. And he took her, and he laid with her, and he disgraced her, or perhaps he afflicted her. And his soul clung to Dinah, the daughter of Yaakov, and he loved the young woman, and he spoke upon the heart of the young woman. And Shechem said to Hamor, his father, "Get for me this girl as a wife." Okay, now verse 5. The Yaakov shama ki timei et Dinah bito uvanav hayu et miknehu basadeh vehecharish Yaakov ad Boab. Verse 6. Vayetse Hamor avi Shechem el Yaakov lidaber ito uvene Yaakov ba'u min hasadeh kishomam vayit atzavu ha'anashim vayichar lahem ma'od ki nevala asa v'Yisrael lishkav et bat Yaakov v'chein lo yeyaseh. Translating in verse 5. Now Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. And his sons, or when his sons were out with his livestock in the field, he remained silent. Jacob remained silent until they returned. And Hamor went out, the father of Shechem, to Jacob to speak with him. And the sons of Jacob came from the field when they had heard, and they were grieved, or the men were grieved, and it angered them greatly. For he did what was foolish in Israel, to lie with the daughter of Jacob. And thus it must not be done. Verse 8. Vayidaber Chamor itam lemor Shechem b'ni chashaka nafsho bevitechem tenu na ota lo laisha. Verse 9. Vehitchatenu otanu benotechem titzenu lanu be'et benotenu tikchu lachem. Verse 10. Be'itanu teshevu v'ha'aretz tehiyeh lifnechem shavu uscharuha v'heachazu ba. Okay, translating verse 8. And Chamor spoke with them, saying, regarding Shechem, my son, his soul longs for your daughter. Give her to him as a wife. And give her to her as a wife, and essentially marry us, or make marriages with us. Your daughters give to us, and our daughters you will take for yourselves. And with us you will dwell, and in the land, and the land will be before you. Settle down and trade. Trade in it and hold possessions in it. Okay, verse 11. Vayomer Shechem el aviha ve'el acheha em tzofchein be'enechem ba'asher tomeru elai eten. Harbu alai mo'od mohar umatan be'etena ka'asher tomeru elai utunu li et hana'ara leisha. He's translating these couple of verses. Verse 11. Shechem said to her father and to her brothers, may I find favor in your eyes. And whatever you say to me, I will give. Make great over me the bride price. So it's basically ask for this extravagant, make it extravagant, the bride price and the gift. And so that I might give just as you say to me, but only give the young woman to me as a wife. Verse 13. V'ya'anu v'nei Yaakov et Shechem ve'et Chamor aviv b'mirma v'yidaberu asher timei et dinah achotam. Verse 14. V'yomeru alehem lo nuchal la asot hadavar hazeh titate et achotenu la ish asher lo or la ki cherpa hi lanu. Verse 15. Ach bezot neot lachem im tehyu chamona or chamonu lehimol, lachem kol zachar. 16. V'natanu et benotenu lachem, ve'et benotechem nikach lanu, v'yashavnu itchem, v'hayinu la'am achad. 17. Ve'im lo tishma'u aleinu, or aleinu, lehimol, v'lakachnu et betenu v'halachnu. Okay, going back to verse 13 to translate. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, with deceit. And they spoke, this is a kind of a weird phrase, and so maybe, and they spoke, but with deceit about or the one who defiled Dinah, their sister. And they said to them, we are not able to give or to do this thing, to give our sister to a man who has a foreskin, for it is a disgrace or a reproach to us. Only on this condition we will agree with you, if you will become like us, to circumcise every male among you. And then verse 16, and then we will give our daughters to you, and your daughters we will receive for ourselves. And we will settle with you, and we will be as one people. If you will not listen to us by circumcising, then we will take our daughters, or maybe our daughter here, and we will go. Verse 18, Vayitvu divrehem ve'enei Chamor u'v'nei Shechem ben Chamor v'lo echar hana'ar la'asot hadavar ki chafetz b'vat Yaakov v'hu nichbad mekol beit aviv. Verse 20, Vayavo Chamor u'Shechem beno el sha'ar Iram vayadaberu el anshe Iram lemor ha'anashim ha'ele shelemim hem itanu vayeshavu va'aretz vayischaru otha v'ha'aretz hine rachavat yadayim lifnehem et benotam nikach lanu lenashim ve'et benotenu nitain lahem. Verse 22, ach bezot yeotu lanu ha'anashim lashevet itanu lehyot la'am echad behimo lanu kol zachar asher hem nim olim. Verse 23, miknehem bekinyanam v'chol behematam behematam halo lanu hem ach neota lahem v'yeshavu itanu. Verse 24, v'yishma'u el Chamor ve'el Shechem beno kol yotzei sha'ar iro v'yimolu kol zachar kol yotzei sha'ar iro. Okay, now going back all the way to 18 and translating. Their words seemed good in the eyes of Hamor and in the eyes of Shechem, son of Hamor. And the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he desired the daughter of Jacob. And he was more honored than all the house of his father. And Hamor came or went, and Shechem, his son, to the gate of their city. And they spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men have made peace, or maybe they are peaceful with us, and they will settle in the land, and they will trade it. And the land, look, it's very broad before them, or it's literally the breadth of hands before them. And their daughters we will receive for ourselves as wives, and our daughters we will give to them. Only on this condition they will agree with us, or the men will agree for us to settle among us, to be as one people in in our circumcision, or our circumcising ourselves for ourselves every male, just as they are circumcised. And their livestock and their possessions and all of their cattle, will it not be ours? Or will they not be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will settle among us, or with us. And when they heard Hamor and Shechem, his son, all of the ones who were going out to the gate of his city, they circumcised themselves, every male, and everyone who went out to the gate of his city. Okay, verse 25 in Hebrew. Vayehi vayom hashalishi v'yotam ko avim vayikachu shnei v'nei Yaakov Shimon v'Levi ache Dina ish cherbo vayavo'u al ha'ir betach vayaharagu kol zachar ve'et Hamor ve'et Shechem beno haragu lefi charav vayikchu et Dina mebeit Shechem ve'yitzeu b'nei Yaakov ba'u al hachalalim vayavozu ha'ir asher timu achotam ve'et zonam ve'et bakaram ve'et chamorehem ve'et asher ba'ir ve'et asher basadeh lakachu ve'et kol chelam ve'et kol tafam or tapham ve'et nishehem shavu vayavozu ve'et kol asher babayet. It's going to keep reading verse 30 here. Vayomer Yaakov el Shimon ve'el Levi achartem oti lahav isheni v'yoshev haaretz v'kanaani ufa perizi v'ani mete mispar v'ne'esafu alai v'hikuni v'nishmadti ani uveti Vayomeru hachizona ya'aset et achotenu. All right. Now going all the way back to 25 and translating the rest of this. It came about in the third day of their being in pain, that they took two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, the brothers of Dinah, took each of his sword. So each took a sword, and they entered into the city securely, and they slayed every male. And Hamor and Shechem, his son, they slayed with the edge of the sword. And they took Dinah from the house of Shechem, and they went out. Now the sons of Jacob entered among the slain bodies, and they plundered the city. Let's see. I guess we want to say, and they plundered the city. Who defiled their sister? Kind of blaming the whole city here. And their sheep and their cattle and their donkeys and all that was in the city and that was in the field, they took. And all of their wealth and all of their children and all of their wives, they captured, and they despoiled or plundered, and everything that was in the house. And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have troubled me, and by making me stink among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And I am few in number, and now they will gather themselves against me, and they will strike me down, and I myself will be destroyed, and my household." And they said, "Is it as a prostitute that they would act against our sister?" Or they would make, perhaps, is it a prostitute that they would make our sister? All right. Thus ends chapter 34, the story of Shechem and Hamor and Dinah and Simeon and Levi and the brothers and Jacob. There's lots of characters in this story. And like so many of the other patriarchal stories, it raises a lot of complex questions about, it's not so much maybe about ethics, but what observations or questions do you all have for Genesis 34?
Okay, I have a nitpicky grammatical question.
Great, I love those.
I saw it a couple of times in here. The one I can find real quick is verse 25, the second word, vayom, in the day.
Yeah.
Why does the initial bait not have the dagesh in it? I thought the Begad Kafats always took the dagesh if they were the initial letter. Yeah,
so that is generally the rule. So yes, a bait among the Begad Kafat letters at the beginning of basically after a closed syllable, we'll take a dagesh lene. But in this context, and you'll see this quite often, it looks back to the previous word, which is vayehi, and with a conjunctive accent, they're wanting to read these together, vayehi vayom. So it's like phonetically picking up. It is the beginning of the word, but it's following a vowel sound. So they're
okay. That makes sense. I get it now. Thank you.
No, good question. Good. Other observations or questions?
Lance, I have 3 questions.
Okay, I better write them down.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Let me see here. Sorry, I should. On the really, again, this comes down to the language and the use of words and pronunciation.
Mm-hmm.
34. Oh, if I got this 34:9 to. Let me go back there. Sorry. To make marriages. So look
Yeah.
at the verb. Uh, to make oneself a daughter's husband, and it's related to the noun. Let's see.
Yeah, the root is chatan.
Chatan. So the distinction. This is really, about pronunciation, I guess.
Yeah.
Because basically, what you have here, the exact same consonants, with the change in the vowels, with the games and the patach, and then the second one, the noun, has the two of the same. Like, I understand there's a subtle difference between the pronunciation. I guess the question is, how do you make that distinction? And then
So
that's, I guess that's the basic question, is like, in pronouncing those two, they're so close. Like, how do you?
so we have the hit chatanu, and which other word? So that's the first word.
Oh no, it's just a noun of like the
Oh,
the
what?
noun form of a daughter's husband is just the same consonants with two. It's not in this text, but I was just wondering in general how you pronounce, make such a fine distinction in the pronunciation in the root forms. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna find the noun form.
It's just.
Here it is. Chotain is a father-in-law. A chatan is a daughter's husband, or a bridegroom.
Yeah.
It really is just about vowel pointing.
Yeah.
So in a verbal form, like this is a hitpael imperative.
Yeah.
You have the doubling of looking at just the word in our text here, the doubling of the tav, the dagesh forte there, because it's a hitpael. So hitchatnu. Maybe I hope I'm answering your question.
Oh, I would just really simply, if you're just pronouncing the root forms, like, how would you pronounce them to make that distinction between the vowel and the second letter? That was all.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess I would say, the roots themselves don't have any meaning or pronunciation, right? It's just three consonantal letters. But typically, when we talk about the root, well, you put the vowels in for the call 3ms chatan. Right. In that case, it would sound a lot like the noun for bridegroom, chatan. Just that, and you have a comets in the noun form. In the call 3ms, you have a comets in the patach. So they would sound just alike, because in modern pronunciation of Hebrew anyway, patach and comets, there's no distinction in pronunciation between the two.
Okay, that's kind of a relief in a way.
Yeah, we just say them both the same way.
Yeah, another one in 34:6, the edge of the sword. No, is that, yikes? I might have wrote that, where it talks about the edge of the sword. So I looked up that word.
That's at the end. That's in verse 26.
And last time, I don't know if somebody was talking about the poverty of words. In the how many words have to do a multifunction. So as we were looking, I just looked at the number of words that this is translated as is phenomenal. I don't know how many. There must be 3 dozen ways these two letters are translated. So
you're right.
I don't know how you decide, like,
Well,
which feels like
literally peh means mouth, but then it gets extended metaphorically to be something that's like maybe, I don't know how exactly it gets to being the edge, but it's a regular idiom for the mouth of the sword. We would call the edge, referring to the edge of the sword. Doesn't mean that when fi is used here, like fi charev, is that they're actually imagining a person's mouth. Right. It's just idiomized, but at some point, it gets extended to mean the edge of something. And actually, there's not just the edge of swords. I think we see this as something else. Maybe there at some point they get there by thinking of the mouth as the edge of the human body or something like that.
Yeah, and apparently it's translated as edges or edge about 39 times, whereas mouth is 275. So I guess that's that's very helpful, and I do find understanding those metaphorical extensions, and I have no vast knowledge, but it is interesting. My last question is more on the relationship of the bridal payment and the gift there in verse 12.
Yeah,
they're coupled together. We don't normally think of purchasing a purchase price.
Right.
Just wondering how do those relate to one another in that culture?
You mean the distinction perhaps between the mohar, the bridal price, and the matan, the gift?
Yeah, and what's really going on? Are they really paying a price, or is it more like a dowry? Or
I think the mohar refers to a dowry. A matan would be more generally a gift. And I don't know, there's a possibility that this is kind of like a Hindiadis where they're basically, he's talking about one thing, using two different words for talking about it. Or we could hypothesize that it's in addition to whatever dowry he would give a gift, but I would take matan to be a more general word than mohar, the dowry. But how they relate, I'm not sure that we can tell that.
Yeah, well, what you said makes sense to me, is that he's trying to go over the top here, and in his offer, like, I can't remember exactly how you translated it, but that makes,
the harbe, like multiply it, multiply it by whatever. Just make it many, make it great. Ask for whatever you want. I'll give it to you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, good questions. Maybe there's follow-up on some of those questions, or maybe others.
I read a book just recently called Misreading Scripture Through Western Eyes, and I don't know if you've read that or not, but it was very interesting. But one of the big things they talk about, of course, is honor, shame, culture, and I just wonder just kind of how that's playing into this. What might seem like just over the top vengeance to us, and granted, Jacob certainly doesn't look well upon it. And if I remember correctly, when he does the final blessings at the end of his life, he holds this against them. So certainly he felt they went too far. But I'm assuming here they feel they must do something to get their sister's honor back and the honor of their family back, because what has happened. And of course, that's, any of us would be outraged if our daughter was raped, of course. But I think for them it might necessitate a more extreme action. And I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud about the honor shame there.
I think it's a really helpful lens to view this story through, where it's kind of about the family name. It's not just about punishing guilt, right? It really is about restoring their whole family has been disgraced. They're thinking about it communally. Of course, thinking about the final question. Are you going to let them make our daughter? And it's interesting that language is used regularly throughout, where Dinah is, well, there it's our sister. In other places, she's sort of their daughter. You're gonna let her treat him like a prostitute. It's sort of, and then we have other phrases that kind of give us some clues. Just as this is a major, not faux pas is too light of a word, right? Insult. This is against the way that it's done in Jacob's family, right? This is not the way that our family does business. And yeah, there's a whole family dynamic involved in this story. I mean, Dinah doesn't even speak. She's totally passive in this story. And I wonder, and certainly we ought to, as readers, be sympathetic toward her. But this is the kind of story that I wonder, like, okay, so are we supposed to side with Simeon and Levi and the brothers, or Jacob, or neither? I mean, you're right that when it comes to the blessing, Simeon and Levi don't receive. Judah ends up receiving the best blessing because he's fourth in line behind Simeon and Levi, which are sort of discounted because of this, and then Reuben because he sleeps with his father's concubine. You know, so the three others sort of are set as, we have stories that mar the character of Reuben and Simeon and Levi, and so Judah is sort of next in line. But on the other hand, this story, I think, does shed some light on, like, I don't think Simeon and Levi are acting, I mean, they're not just simply acting out of vengeance. It is vengeful, but it's kind of a vindication. And I guess along with this, kind of the bigger picture, also Jacob. I mean, we've been talking about Jacob's character for, you know, seeing him sort of on this roller coaster is, and when his interpretation of these events are, it's all about the good of his household, kind of the greater good for his household. And really not, I mean, he is, I think it's interesting, like when Jacob hears this news, even the Hebrew. So if we look at, let's see, verse 5, pretty early on, right? It steps out of the narrative. It steps away from the Vayikol, which is the kind of the Hebrew form that's for, it's giving plot sequence. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. And we have sort of some background about Jacob, where he heard, and what Jacob heard, that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. And then we have, and his sons were out with the livestock in the field, and he remained silent. Jacob remained silent until they returned. It's like there's a lot there. I think it's typically Jacob seemed to be really passive. But this phrase, maybe that's more because of what comes after. But he's sort of being wise throughout this story, like for the good of his household, so everything doesn't get ruined. He's gonna like not react immediately. But I think it's up in the air a little bit, like we're supposed to puzzle about who's right in this story, or is just everybody wrong to one degree or another.
The response that Jacob gives is basically, you guys act deceitfully in this, because he buries all the household idols and then takes them all to Bethel outside.
In the next chapter?
Yeah.
Yeah. And certainly Mirma comes up here. So Simeon and Levi act with deceit, and Jacob. The other time we've seen that story, or that word specifically of deceit, is in the interpretation by, I think, Isaac, when he's speaking to Esau, he says, your brother acted deceitfully and took the blessing. So it's chapter 27.
Okay. When you see your family going wrong, you try to correct it. And that seems to be his interest at this point.
Yeah. It does fit with what David said. I think Jacob's concerned for his family's welfare, and also like, what are the Canaanites going to say about us? You know, like they're going to think of us as a bunch of marauders, and sort of bringing shame upon the family. And Hamor, if we think about the other dad in the story, does not evidently despise Shechem or look down upon Shechem for his violation. He just tries to marry them off. Tries to basically to satisfy Shechem's desires.
Well, it would be just like Lot got assimilated.
Yeah.
Jacob would have too.
I do think assimilation is really a big part of this story. And because that's part of the deceit, right? Hey, we'll all be one, and we'll buy and sell together, and we'll kind of share possessions. And Hamor's appeal to the ones that are at the gate of the city is, hey, we'll get all their stuff. Like, it's a small thing, sort of appealing to their self-interests. And of course, though, then Simeon and Levi never mean to assimilate. And Jacob, I don't know that he intends to assimilate, but he wants to live like Abraham has, peacefully next to. But again, they don't own or buy land at this point either. So they're living on somebody else's land, and that's important. The land is like another character in the story here. Yeah, Richard?
So, I mean, there are just so many touchstones between this story and later stories. I'm not sure if the Hebrews is, but like when Shechem says, "Take her," like, I mean, later we hear Samson, right, with that same kind of idea. We see Jacob's in action here, and we'll see David's in action. And David was furious, but he doesn't do anything, and then that sparks the whole the Absalom thing. I mean, there are so many points. We see this Levi being vengeful here, and then it's like Baal Peor, right? It's the Levites who right. I mean, this is. I think this is a story that we don't teach so much because it deals with sensitive material. I mean, my girls aren't in here today, but as we read on, there are so many touchstones later. I mean, it's looking back to Sodom and Gomorrah, looking ahead to Judges 19, and I mean, there are connections there as well. And it's just.
Yeah, that's a great connection with David's story and Absalom acting, his inaction. And of course, that's kind of within his own house, the rape of his daughter, but
there you see what the Canaanites have done, right? Has now entered David's house. And it's like this contrast, like how bad the Canaanites. We read how bad the Canaanites are, and then by then we're going, oh, it's in David's house.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's one thing I love about a lot of these narratives is just sort of the motifs that repeat. And it's hard to know, I think sometimes, like if you're teaching this or preaching this, let's say, story, what to do with it. Where's God in this story? Why is it here? Why are they telling it to us? But sometimes when we can put it together with later actions, and it's just sort of the human condition. It's a story about if there's a theological component, is that God is somehow using their mess to carry out, his mission is moving forward in spite of them, or maybe through them, through their flaws. There's kind of a word play here that I didn't pick up until reading it this week, is chamor.
It's a donkey.
Means donkey. And
Yeah.
then I would think, often I would just say, well, that's just, a name, and maybe there's not much to it. But in verse 28, they take their sheep, the tzon, the bakar, the cattle, and then the chamorehem, their donkeys. And I don't really know what to make of that. I can't, but it's sort of a slight at the people. For what it's worth, there's I think that word play is purposeful here.
Do you think in the eyes of the nations around, it was not the disagreement, but the deception? That two guys could take out a whole city by deception?
Yeah, we'll explain a little bit more what you're thinking.
It says later that all the nations around them did not go after them because they were afraid.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So
I suppose, go ahead, Dusty.
This is kind of a question of mine, and I think it relates heavily to what's being said or asked, I guess. I have this idea that many times there are more people present than we read their names. For instance, they say, we'll marry your daughters, plural, and you can marry our daughters, plural. All we read about is Dinah. But I think that might be because she's the only one that has a significant event surrounding her. And part of where I come from this is, if you go back to the genealogies, like in Genesis chapter 5, and then later, I think it's in chapter 11, right? It's like he lived this long and had this particular son, and then he had other sons and daughters and died. And he lived this and so many more years. And then he had other sons and daughters, but he had this one you need to know about. And it's kind of like you only read about the key players in the events. So my wondering on this one is it only Levi and Simeon, or did Levi and Simeon lead a raid of many people? If that makes sense. Likewise, is there more than just Dinah, the daughter? She's just the only one that we read about. Because if I remember right, and I off the top of my head, I can't remember where this would be located, but I feel like there's an indicator that Leah had more daughters than just Dinah. I'm trying to remember where that is, but I'm just wondering if it's not only two guys that come in and do the raiding, but Levi and Simeon were leading the charge, and so they're the ones named because they're the key players. But it's actually, like for instance with Abraham, whenever he goes after Lot, it says he has 316 of his men within his house. So I'm like, wherever Abram goes, there's an entourage with it. It's not just one guy and Lot and his, and Sarah, his wife. It's like, there's quite a crowd. So I can't help but wonder if everywhere that Jacob is going, he's also got quite a crowd. And so some of these people may be involved as well. We just don't read their names, or they aren't exactly pronounced. So that's a question / curiosity, I guess, of mine that I have with a lot of the Genesis narrative.
Could be. So starting with Abraham, he does have he only has this one child, Isaac, but he has, there's this Eliezer guy, and there's this, there's others he's picked up from Abimelech and others. He has servants, a lot of servants, and he's got this extravagant wealth. Of course, Jacob left all that, went solo. And when he's in Haran or Padan Aram, he, of course, acquires all this wealth, but it's kind of through these 4 women and their children and Laban's sheep and livestock and things. But whether he has servants or not, I can't remember whether we actually hear that. And when he divides up his household going to Esau, he divides it up in 4 parts, and it doesn't seem to be any evidence that the story that he has a lot of people, but it seems to be all like his family. In this story, I was reading, I'm not saying that, I think it is interesting that they're using plural, right? You'll make marriages and yeah, your daughters and our daughters. I think that's sort of part of the agreement about their future. At least that's the way I was taking it. Like, we're going to be one people. We'll give and take each other's daughters in marriage and so on. It is interesting though, when you get to the actual slaughtering, of course, they're essentially incapable of fighting because they're fresh off of circumcision. And then, so that's sort of the on the cuff explanation of how this could happen. But verse 27, that then you have the sons of Jacob. So they do take just Dinah out from his household. So Dinah is in Shechem's household in verse 26. They take her out and then they leave. And then the sons of Jacob come. So is this the other sons?
Yeah.
The rest of the family, they're sort of a part of this among the slaying, and they plunder the city, and then they take all the stuff, including people. So this would be the story when Jacob's household gets basically plunders, just like we saw with Abraham, not really plundering, but from Egypt and from Abimelech, the Philistine area, getting like more servants. So it could be, Dusty, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you that because you're right, Abraham's story there's a whole bunch of other people. It just seems like Jacob, that maybe we can think of a place where Jacob's family is basically descendants of his own children.
Yeah, in the next chapter, you see Deborah's nurse dies. Now, how did she get there?
Yeah, so yeah, that's right. So there are, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good sign that there are other people around. But back to your original question, Betty, that I think they will be feared among the Canaanites for an action like this, like slaughtering. If maybe not maybe their deceit is part of that. Maybe there's this quality that even though they're small, it's clear that Jacob's been blessed so that he has divine favor or something that would certainly make them more fearful or feared.
But later on, you see them parking their critters by Shechem when Joseph goes to look for them.
What? Say that again. That you see them what?
In the Joseph story, the brothers have gone up by Shechem to pasture their flocks.
Yeah. So you have this other wordplay here, right? The place called Shechem, and the person Shechem here, and you wonder what they're going to go make a covenant at Shechem. It's an important place, like covenantal place for Jacob's family. And then the Joseph narrative. But this story doesn't talk about Shechem as a place, it's a person who dies. But so there's a connection there. And I would think we should recognize that connection for sure. Good. Any final kind of comments or questions or ponderings? So what do we make of, who do you side with in the story? Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy?
Big question.
Well, we tend to look at this through the eyes of agape because of the Christian perspective.
Yeah.
But this is a normal thing, it seems like, at least from the archaeology, of nations in conflict with one another.
Yeah, right. It's normal for warring tribes and things, I suppose. Yeah.
Isis,
But if we think about it if there is an ethic of the patriarchal narratives, even within Genesis, framing it, maybe that helps us just distinguish a bit some the heroes. If there is there a hero, is there a villain? I think we have a villain. Shechem, I think he's certainly defiled and violated Jacob's family. And the story is pretty clear that he shouldn't have done that, right? His action initiates this.
One question I had on this, Lance, is with regards to proportional justice. One of the challenges, I think, is it seems the reaction is way out of proportion.
Yeah.
And then it seems like, well, I think it is a fact that when we get to Exodus and the giving of the law, that proportional justice seems to be a thing in Israel. It becomes a thing that on one hand, it looks cruel to us, but in context, proportional justice was actually a huge step forward. But then when you think about Esther, blood on Israel's side was yet to be shed, although the decree was there, but the vengeance that was taken just seems way out of proportion. So I'm not really sure how, that part of that other side of the covenant and the extreme actions that people on that side would really, it's a big question.
Yeah, well, you're right that like talionic law, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, is a limitation on the vengeance that can be taken. So it's meant to be about limiting this kind of act, perhaps. Esther, by the way, I think has a lot of, maybe we could do that for Hebrew Story Hour in the future. There's a lot of humor and hyperbole. And so I think some of the extreme nature of like the slaughter and so on fits sort of the genre of Esther as a kind of over the top story, purposefully, humorously even. But yeah, it's not after an eye for an eye. We get that law. It's not that people don't take extreme vengeance, especially in warfare, which this essentially is.
There was one little observation. I just wanted to connect two dots here with the honor main point, and then I think Richard's point about the crowds of people with Abraham. I just heard this the other day. It never really sunk in, but when you look at 1 Peter 3, and where it says that Sarah called Abraham Lord, and the point was made that in context of all the people in his household, the hundreds of servants and shepherds or whatever, that her example of respect for him was a demonstration of honor for the rest of them. And the one who pointed this out used an example of a husband and wife. The man was a doctor, the wife was the nurse, secretary, and always in the office when she introduced a patient, your time has come, so Dr. Henderson will see you now, even though it was Bob. And just that sign of respect of Sarah for Abraham in context, I think makes a huge difference to our understanding of that importance of honor and shame in today. Anyway,
that's good.
I thought that was a helpful insight.
Yeah,
it's not mine. Jerry Martin made that one.
Okay, yeah, good. We're about up at time, but any final comment, Richard? I saw you on mute.
How did you translate here? I have in verse 30 the making me odious among the inhabitants, making me stink.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the I forget what word you use, but that phrase looks like it's the same one that we next see in terms of making me a stink or making us a stink before Pharaoh. So when I wrestle with this and try and sort out, yes, it seems like an extreme thing, but it ends with the question, and then Jacob's concern is you're making me stink to the non-chosen people.
Yeah.
And then the next time we see it is, the complaining about Moses, you're making us stink to Pharaoh. It pushes me to one side, but I mean, every time I read this, I'm in the air on it. But I didn't know if you all reacted like that. Is that a clue to sorting this out or not?
Yeah, Exodus 5:21. I think that's a helpful. The Lord look on you and judge because you've made us stink in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants, and you've put a sword in their hand to kill us. Yeah, that's a helpful parallel. And I do think some of the parallels to this story help us interpret it. Who's this speaking to?
It's to Moses, I think.
Yeah,
Moses, it might be Moses and Aaron.
Because he's taken vengeance. Is that right? Or well, actually, no, because he's confronted Pharaoh.
Yes.
Pharaoh's just making it more difficult. Yeah. So that in that case, it would be, I mean, they're doing the will of God, and that's causing them to have a bad reputation among the people. But then maybe this is a good place to end it, where thinking about honor and shame is, in spite of maybe having shame among our neighbors, doing the will of the Lord, which I don't know that I would put Simeon and Levi doing the will of the Lord here, but there is a place for acting justly and righteously in a way that might conflict with the ethics and the values of their culture. And I think assimilation, non-assimilation does kind of fit certainly both of these stories. But that's a good parallel, just to have the word used again with Exodus.
So what did you find out about the blessing?
Was I supposed to? I was going to do homework, wasn't I? I don't remember. What was the question again?
At the first class, you said you learned more about the blessing.
At the beginning of today?
Mm-hmm. Jacob?
Yeah, I'm trying to put things together in my own mind. I'm not remembering, but in this story, if we're talking about this story,
I just thought it made the comment at the first class that you'd learned something this past week that you thought you'd share with the class.
Maybe it was this morning. I was having a conversation about the Genesis passage about stealing the blessing, and my colleague Steve Clower was studying that passage with his family, and he asked the question, who's the villain and who's the hero? And he was making the point that maybe Rebecca is sort of like a hero, and even though she's deceiving, she and Jacob are deceiving Isaac. And of course, others in his family pushed back against that point because it's so such an affront to our own notions of honesty, the virtues of honesty. And I mean, their conclusion, I think one of his children said, maybe it's not like the point, and I think this is true for our story, to choose a hero and a villain, but to see that in spite of our mess, God is sort of continuing to work. And that's a good word, I think, for kind of even through it. So the blessing is really independent of ourselves. It's really the work of God among us. Maybe that's what I was thinking. But that is, I think that I have a hard time like concluding with Genesis 34 that like, because God's not in this story, to see how it works out well for him. But it's one that, like that other story, that prompts us to kind of wrestle with character.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all again for being here. We have one more week before we're discontinuing Hebrew Story Hour at least for the summer. And so we'll do Genesis 35 next week, and also maybe have a few ideas about what's to come for Hebrew Story Hour. So thank you all for your consistent
Thank you. I've
attendance.
enjoyed this.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks, Len.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Shalom lachem.